Now, as we've talked in previous lessons, one of the things that we need to focus on whenever starting any campaign is to identify what the goals are. What is it we're trying to do? Who are we trying to reach? All that good stuff, okay? So rich media ad formats allow us to do this very effectively. It allows us to engage with consumers directly. It allows advertisers to go out and identify specific things that they want to measure, and the KPIs are often built in. They can say, okay, well, we want to measure the number of times someone interacted or clicked on our print button. We want to measure the number of times someone expanded the ad. That's going to tell us whether it was effective or not. It will give us a sense of whether the branding worked, that kind of thing, okay? So really looking for a way to attract consumers and to get them to interact in some sort of meaningful and measurable way. So how do we measure rich media ads? Once again, it really depends entirely upon what you're trying to do, and there are a lot of functionalities that can be built in. But a lot of times just being able to say how much time did someone spend with their cursor over the ad space? Because that tells us a little something. Let's say that the ad is designed so that it expands when you put your cursor over it, and when you take the cursor off, it unexpands. It goes back and contracts to being the size it was when it started. Well, it tells you a little something about the point of engagement. If I roll over this ad, and it expands, and there's a clock running to say, okay, this person just rolled over this ad and they're holding it open for 17 seconds before it contracts, then it tells me a little something about the overall experience that that consumer had. Now, maybe somebody expanded it for 1 second. Well, that's telling a very different story. Maybe they just rolled their cursor over the ad on their way to someplace else, that kind of thing. So it tells us a little bit more about the overall effectiveness of an ad, how many people saw it, but we also get all of this data. We can look at a composite and say, well, our ad ran and the average person had it open for 19 seconds. Well, what does that mean? Was it a branding campaign, and is that a good number? And the chances are it's a fantastic number compared against, once again, against the traditional methodologies, whether it's television or radio or print, and what we can measure and what we know about those. But even measuring it against online technologies, display ads, for example, we don't know necessarily what the interaction rates are. We don't know how many people looked at the ad and read the ad and said, that's interesting, I'll have to keep that in mind. At least this way, the advertiser can create mechanisms that will allow them to say, well, we know that they were reading the ad because they opened it on purpose. They expanded it, they saw the content, and then they put it away. And that tells us a little something about the effectiveness. That tells us that they saw the ad, even if they didn't click on it. Even if there's no other point of interaction, it tells us an awful lot. So being able to have something like an ad hover rate, or, once again, we look at overall interaction rates. What did you interact with? We can tag all these different elements within an ad and say, did you interact with this thing over here? Or did you click on this truck? Or was it a matter of moving the car keys from here to this point? What happened? And so all of those different factors can be measured independently of one another. We can also look at unique events. You can say, okay, well, I want to see how many people actually clicked through to the second frame. I want to see how many people selected the Assassins movie to watch that, because that's going to tell me a little something about their overall interest. It's going to tell me a little something about the effectiveness of the ad as well. How many people expanded the ad? Once again, tell us something. How many people played the video? Not only that, how many people played the video all the way to the end? And there are ways that we can measure video interaction. There's something called quartile reporting, and quartile reporting allows us to break a video down into quarters. So how many people watched the first 25% of the video? How many people watched the first 50% or the first 75%, or watched it all the way through? How many people paused it? How many people rewound it? How many people watched it again? Once again, all of this data tells a very interesting story about the effectiveness of the media and how impactful it was in reaching the needs of a consumer or the interest of a consumer. Okay? And of course, direct response. We're still looking for ways to move the needle here. It's not just a matter of, hey, the ad ran fantastic. We're also saying, did we collect email addresses? Were we able to get people to sign up? Did they send us their phone numbers? Did they do whatever we wanted them to do? Did they print out a shopping list? All that stuff, okay? So direct response is going to be a huge part, but once again, we can measure things within the context of the ad space. We can find the KPIs right there and not have to rely on going to some sort of landing page and figuring out later what it all is about. It's a much more easily managed, and if you plan it well, it tells a much better story than a lot of the media offline and online that we've had to work with. Now, once again, we should probably just get out there. Once again, I know we've talked about it, but from a defining standpoint, branding and direct response, as a reminder, measuring engagement within the ad unit is really what branding is going to do for us. If I know that you have engaged with this ad unit and I grabbed your attention, then I know that branding has happened. And that's key. Being able to measure that 37% of the people who saw this ad interacted with it, even if it's just in a minor way, tells us a huge story, as opposed to, well, we ran a bunch of ads, nobody clicked on them. We don't know who saw them. At least we have a better sense of whether they were perceived or not. And with direct response, it's really a matter of measuring the events or the KPIs that relate to the campaign goals. And as I said, a lot of this has to do with what we want people to do from a conversion standpoint. So if that's capturing their email address, or if it's acquiring them as a new customer, or however we want to measure that, how many times they looked at the ad, what the interaction times were, direct sales, whatever. You get the point. So overall, we want to make sure that these goals are being met. Now, there's also some huge competitive and results benefits. Once again, if I had to compare two campaigns side by side, one which is not rich and one which is, well, is there a value here? Yeah, there is. Because, for example, the rich media, no matter how we slice it, is probably going to be more engaging and more eye-catching. We just have more technology to work with, something that will make it more interesting to a consumer and have them say, ooh, I just saw something. We can also, as I mentioned, eliminate the need to have to turn it into a one-trick pony, which is as soon as we can drive traffic to our landing page, then we can tell you all about the good stuff we want to tell you, and instead say, we're going to tell you all about the good stuff we want to tell you about within the context of the ad, because that's really what we're trying to do. And then finally, we of course have much richer metrics and analytics to work with, which tells a good story. Now, a word of caution here. You can collect an awful lot of data on the back end of a rich media campaign. And this is also the good news and the bad news, because once again, if you then turn around and say, okay, look at all this data, but nobody knows what to do with it, then it really just becomes data. And I've had conversations with clients and I said, look at all the data that we have here. What a phenomenal amount of information has been collected from this campaign. And I've had the clients say, yeah, this is really good, but can you do me a favor? Can you show me how many times the ad was served and how many times someone clicked on it? And so they go back to this kind of methodology of, oh, the only thing I really understand is how to figure out to use this data for click-through. And instead we want to move them away from that, saying, let's not talk about click-through as deeply. Once again, it tells part of the story. I'm not saying it's totally useless, but I'm saying it's not the strong indicator. And let's use that then in a way of saying, okay, instead of just click-through, what about interaction rates? What about interaction with specific elements? What does this tell us? And use that data to tell a more interesting story. But also, there are some challenges. There are a number of publishers who can't run rich media ads. They're just not set up for it. They're designed to work with ad serving that goes into standard display ad size formats. For them, as a small publisher or anything else, they would have to jump through a lot of hoops technologically on their end in order to get these ads to run, and it's a problem. They might be able to make money, but they don't have anybody who knows how to set the pages up so that this would happen, etc. Now, some of the third-party rich media companies can handle a lot of this, and a lot of them do. They make it as simple as possible. Once again, from a publisher standpoint, implementation is hard. From an advertiser standpoint, it's much more complicated, obviously, to put this type of a campaign together. It's more expensive. It takes a lot more time to get it implemented. So there are some challenges on that side. But, you know, it's also, in the long run, if you can prove the value of it, then it's worthwhile. Now, the sales role for rich media is going to require understanding some of the technical possibilities or restrictions here. Now, we often joke about it, and I spent a number of years in sales and also working with production teams. And so somehow creating a bridge between what the sales team had on their table, which was generally, as you know, they had to make sales. They had numbers that needed to be met every month, and this was something that they never lost sight of, and we didn't either. But the challenge sometimes in a technological standpoint is that when a client says, we want to do X, and the salesperson says, I want to make a sale, and so they say, yeah, sure, we can do that for you. That shouldn't be a problem. Well, sometimes it is a problem. And the real challenge, of course, is getting on the phone with an advertiser and saying, I understand that's what the service rep told you and would like to be able to provide you with that level of service. Unfortunately, that's technologically impossible. We can't do that for you, so we're going to have to find an alternative. And those are very difficult conversations to have. So it's worthwhile to be able to go out and to work with a customer, work with an advertiser, and to set their expectations right. And if they say, we want to do X, and you say, well, yes, I understand you might want that, but it can't be done, or it certainly can't be done affordably or technologically, but to be able to come up with an alternative, saying, okay, well, that's an interesting approach. What we could do for you is we could take your video and we can put it in the context of this ad space, and we could really run it this way. So there's a certain level of creative understanding, there's a certain level of technological understanding that the sales team member needs to carry with them. Either that or drag somebody from the production team with you to these meetings. And we did that more than once. It was an opportunity to say, okay, we're going to go in, we're going to do a pitch, but I don't want anybody to step in it. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to bring somebody who understands the technological aspects of what can be done and what the restrictions are to sit in the meeting. And if the client has a question that says, well, how do we do X? Then we turn to the technology person and we say, well, how do we do X? And have them answer the question so that nobody needs to guess at it. Because it's a lot easier to head them off at the pass before they start making their mind up and getting excited about something that they're not going to be able to have. Because, by the way, nobody wants to have a disappointed customer on their hands, and you don't either. So being able to understand the technological restrictions, understanding what the steps are. How do the advertisers get from concept to getting the ad running live? You need to be able to understand that either as a publisher rep or a third party, but being able to help them understand what the steps are so that, once again, setting their expectations on how long it's going to take, how complicated it is, how much it's going to cost, all this stuff. Once again, balance that against the benefit. Yes, it's going to cost more. Yes, it's going to be more complicated, but it's going to be so much more effective than anything you've ever run before. So let's look at that. And of course, just knowing the standards. Once again, different publishers have different restrictions, but most publishers abide by a similar standard based upon what the IAB has put out. And so once again, if you look here at the URL on this screen, this is where you can get the display guidelines. And it covers rich media guidance, all the different sizes. It tells people what the initial dimensions of the ad can be, what they can expand up to, what the initial data footprint of an ad is, how much animation you can have, how much video you can have. All of those standards are in there. And you want to make sure that whenever you go down this path and you say to a client, yeah, that shouldn't be a problem, we can do that for you, that you understand what the technological restrictions are going to be. Because if you go back to a development team and you say, we need to create this rich media ad, and here's what the client wants, well, that has to be delivered. And if the creative team can't find a way to make that happen because the publisher is going to say, nope, I'm sorry, that's not going to be something we're going to be able to offer you, then you've just created a problem for yourself. And the only way around this oftentimes is to go into direct negotiations with individual publishers and see if they will make an exception for your ad. And sometimes they will, and sometimes quite literally they will stick to their guns and say, no, there's just no way we're going to change that. You're going to play by the same rules that everybody else plays, regardless of whether you're paying us or not. So it's something that you should be aware of, and you're going to have to intercede from time to time. By the way, there are some new rich media standards that were released recently, and so you should definitely go in there and check out what's going on, what called the rich media branding units, and some brand new methodologies that are being out there. Once again, everything online is still evolving pretty rapidly, and so an opportunity to be able to stay aware of what's going on is going to be really, really important to anybody who's representing these technologies. So once again, I encourage you to grab or download the display guidelines from the IAB, learn about rich media, read through it, get a better understanding of what some of the restrictions are. I'm not saying you have to memorize this chart, but I'm saying having it as a resource so that when somebody asks you a question, you can say, well, that's interesting. Let me check on that for you, and we'll find out if we can do that for you. It's going to save you a lot of heartache in the long run.